Hey guys, today we're making a white chocolate raspberry cake. It's gonna be delicious and pretty. Let's get started. First thing, we're gonna whisk all the wet ingredients together. So, that's 1/2 cup of milk, 1/2 cup of sour cream, 3/4 of a cup of unsalted butter at room temperature. It has to be super soft. It's not gonna make a completely homogeneous mixture. You will have some little butter clumps, but don't panic, it'll be okay. 1 tablespoon of vanilla. It's a lot, but it's worth it. Time for 3 egg whites. The only reason we're not using the yolk is because the yolk is so yellow and we want to have a nice white cake with little red flecks in it from the raspberries. If you don't care about it, or if you like yellow, go ahead and include the yolks. Save these yolks for later. You can use them to make a curd, like a lemon curd or a raspberry curd. Just make sure you cover them in the fridge. Now let's give it a good whisk, and just remember that you will have clumps in here. So if you see these butter clumps, that's totally fine, don't worry. So for the dry ingredients, we have 1 2/3 cups of flour, all-purpose, 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda, 1 teaspoon of baking powder, a healthy pinch of kosher salt, and 1 cup of white granulated sugar. Let's sift it together, and then we'll whisk it together, and we're on our way. Okay, let's make sure everything's incorporated together. All right, add our wet ingredients in. Scrape the bowl down to make sure nothing's left behind. There's no need to waste. I was never allowed to waste food as a child. In fact, and I've told my mom this story several times as an adult, I wanted to do paper mache once, because I saw it on TV, and I asked my mom for some flour, and she's like, wasting flour and not eating it? Never. She grew up in Mexico, and that just didn't happen. So my paper mache artistic ambitions were thwarted. All right, so I'm just giving this a nice mix. You could use a whisk if you wanted to. This could also be done with a paddle attachment and a standing mixer. But basically you're just making sure there aren't any pockets of flour left over that are unmixed and dry. All right, I'm feeling a little sassy, so before I add in my dried raspberries, I'm gonna zest most of a lemon. For this recipe, we're using freeze-dried raspberries because they are not going to create like a puddle of undercooked cake batter in the center of the pan. All right, so here I have about a cup of freeze-dried raspberries. And we're just gonna fold that in. Gorgeous. You just wanna make sure it's evenly distributed in the batter so no one gets a piece of cake that's totally blank with no raspberries in it. Set that aside. And now for our pans. This recipe is using 6-inch pans. If you wanted to use 3 8-inch pans, I would go ahead and double the recipe. After you butter your pans, just add in about a tablespoon of flour and kick it around so that you get a nice coating. There's nothing as tragic, well, there are many things as tragic, but there's something very upsetting for a baker if their cake doesn't release properly or if it cracks. Let's give it a good tap to get all the excess flour out. You want just enough to cling to the butter. Before I add the batter into the pans, I'm gonna wrap them in cake strips. Cake strips are literally just strips of fabric that you wet. You can make your own. You can use tin foil and paper towels to make them too, but they're very cost effective and they give you flat layers. They insulate the outside and cool it down during baking so that the entire cake layer bakes at an even temperature and you get a nice flat top, which is perfect for stacking and decorating. Just soak them in water before you get started and then wring them out right before you put them on. All right, let's distribute our batter evenly into our 3 pans. The cake's gonna go into the oven at 340 for about half an hour. Just check in on it, rotate the pans so you don't get any hot spots in your oven, and test it with the skewer in the center at the very end. Then you'll know you're totally done. So the inside of the cake is gonna have a white chocolate and white chocolate raspberry filling. We have 1 cup of white chocolate chips, pot of boiling water, and you're gonna plop this just over. You don't want the water to touch the bowl, it's basically just steaming, and that'll be a perfect temperature to melt the white chocolate. Into our standing mixer, we're adding 1.5 cups of unsalted butter at room temperature. Use paddle attachment so that you won't get a lot of air bubbles whipped into the buttercream. Okay, lock it, and then we're gonna mix it on low. 4.5 cups of confectioner sugar. I'm gonna add a pinch of salt in and give it a mix on low, but first, I'm gonna cover this with a tea towel so I don't have a toxic sugar cloud enveloping everything. Much better. Checking back in on our double boiler, we can see that we have nice melted white chocolate. And I'm gonna turn it off now and just let it cool a bit. But that's perfect. Now I'm gonna add in my 1 cup of melted and cooled white chocolate. Adding chocolate to buttercream just gives this silky consistency that is nearly indescribable. It really ups the flavor profile. So I highly recommend it whenever possible. Now let's give that a mix. I don't know if you can tell, but the texture on this is just like so silky and amazing. So now the other half of the batter is gonna get dyed and flavored with fresh raspberry juice. If you don't have fresh raspberries, go get some frozen ones and just defrost them, and the juice is perfect. I have about 1/4 cup here, and I'm just gonna squeeze them through a sieve so we don't get any seeds. Fresh raspberry juice has like such a zing to it, it's really lovely. Now we're just gonna give this a mix and see what the color's like and if we wanna add some more raspberries into it. All right, so I mixed in about 1/2 cup of raspberry, and I added in an extra cup of confectioner sugar because you're adding a liquid in, the buttercream becomes more soupy, the sugar will tighten it back up. So this is the end result. We get a nice blush color, which I enjoy, and it has the zing of raspberries. I'm piping melted white candy melt onto parchment paper using a piping bag. I have the stencil downloadable on the blog. Now it's time for the white chocolate buttercream filling. I piped using a large round tip, but to get the two-tone effect, I have my raspberry buttercream in one bag, my plain white chocolate buttercream in another, and both of those are in a third bag fitted with a large round tip. You can see the nice flat layers I get from my cake strips. They really, really make a difference. Now I'm crumb coating the cake with the remaining white chocolate buttercream. You only need a paper thin layer of this for the crumb coat, so scrape off as much as needed. Give it a nice flat top by using an offset spatula to pull the edges in while you turn. And then you're gonna pop it into the fridge to chill for maybe 15 minutes. All right, so my cake is crumb coated and chilling in the fridge, and now I'm gonna whip up a batch of Italian buttercream, which I love because it is so creamy and not too sweet. It really lets the other flavors stand out, but the mouthfeel is just amazing. You can click at the top of the screen for my how-to video and make that recipe in full. When I come back, we will be decorating the cake. To get the ombre effect, I divided the buttercream into 5 batches and then had one plain, one really pink, and worked my way through the middle to get a gradient. Just pipe on with a piping bag that you snip the tip off of. The key is going to be when you smooth to clean your scraper off after each smoothing. That way you'll maintain the gradient. Final step is to add your hearts. You can add as many or as few as you'd like. I had the small ones on the bottom and the larger ones on top. I also piped some with arrows because it's for Valentine's Day. Hope you enjoy, and don't forget to subscribe.